Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second installment of Momcology's new webinar series, Caregiver Lounge. We're so happy you can join us tonight and take this step forward in your personal self-care. If you don't know me, I'm Kim Buff, and I'm the founder and have been the executive director of Momcology for 11 years. In 2022, Momcology surveyed our caregiver community about the topics of most interest in caregiver health and well-being. With your help, tonight's webinar on communication was identified as a high priority need. But before we get started and introduce tonight's wonderful speaker, we have a few housekeeping notes. So this webinar is in view-only mode. We can't see or hear you, so please feel free to get as comfortable as you'd like. We will break for questions during the presentation, so please do use the dedicated question and answer box at the bottom of your screen for your questions or any technology issues throughout the webinar. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Natalie Naguib as our presenter tonight. Dr. Naguib is a pediatric psychologist in the Cancer Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She has worked with children and adults in addressing issues of anxiety, depression, behavioral difficulties, trauma, grief, and loss. Additionally, Dr. Naguib is an ongoing contributor to Momcology's hospital-based program called Connections, which is now operating within 8 treatment centers. So with that, welcome to our couch, Dr. Naguib. We're so happy to have you with us tonight as our second guest in the Momcology Caregiver Lounge.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I am not very technologically skilled, but give me 1 second. I'm just going to try to pull up our slideshow. Okay.
Take your time. We're all learning together. That's what tonight's about. Okay. You got it.
So far, so good, I think. All right. Are you able to see it?
Yes, we are.
Okay, sounds good. So we will get started. So again, thank you so much for having me. Momcology is near and dear to my heart. And so I think it's so exciting to be able to speak to kind of a larger group of, of individuals that partake in Momcology's services and supports. I am just going to put out there right now that I do not love talking to myself. It is not my favorite thing. As a psychologist, I'm used to having people directly in front of me. So as I am imagining your faces, I really do hope, and I strongly encourage you to pretty please do not hold on to any questions that might occur to you as we're going through the presentation. Please jot them down as they come to you in the Q&A. And there will be periods throughout where we'll take a break and move on to hearing from you, which honestly is going to be my favorite part of tonight. And just as a reminder, we did sort of carve out the next hour and a half, so we should be wrapping up by 7:30. Okay, guess we can get started. All right, so I don't think anyone on this webinar tonight is a stranger to stress, or the unexpected stress avalanche, as I like to call it. Connection and support is key to coping and making it through life in general, especially when things are hard. When a crisis or a difficult life event occurs, there is inevitable change. Adjustment to that change is not possible without communication. We don't exist in a vacuum, and our changes or any change around us does require constant adjustment. If we don't communicate in that change, then nothing else is going to be able to change around us, and that shift is going to suffer. Just like if a gear in the cog begins to move, but the other parts are not able to adapt, the whole system is going to break down. Okay. So tonight we're going to review some basic but often neglected basics of communication. We're going to kind of talk about what gets in the way versus what helps. So the topic of communication is obviously a broad one and can be applied to countless scenarios. So as we're kind of moving through some of this, I hope that you will consider all the talking points and how they might really resonate with you in your personal life, and then try to tailor that into the questions that you sort of submit in the Q&A, because there was just going to be no way of addressing all those pieces in a few short slides tonight. So I'm hoping that we can take the opportunity to address some of those things that might apply more specifically to what you have going on in life. So let's take a quick poll as kind of a small teaser as to what we're going to be getting into a little bit later. How often do you wait until things are less stressful before deciding to bring up a heated topic? A, always, B, most of the time, C, sometimes, and D, not often. I didn't even want to put the option for not at all. So if anyone is like me and has never used polls before, I think there should be a button in your bar that you can utilize. Okay. So sometimes is the winner. I'm assuming if I can see this, everybody else can, yeah? Okay. Followed by most of the time and always and not often. I am impressed that there's 15% already saying always. That is pretty amazing. So as you can see, sometimes is half of us. And if I were to ask you, which is the better approach, you would 100% of you know the correct answer to this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we do in practice, right? Okay. Okay, so again, we're going to review what gets in the way versus what helps with communication. Because I'd like to end on a more positive note, I figured we'd start with the potential pitfalls first. Communication, what gets in the way? So one of the first things on here is a weak foundation. Paying attention to kind of, your foundation before you're even starting that communication, and what do you have in play? What could be problematic? What could be beneficial? Problematic body language. We communicate so much through more than our actual speech. And a lot of times we don't attend to that often because it sometimes just even feels like a reaction, and that we're not necessarily being mindful of. Picking the right time and place. Negative emotion often can get in the way, and history. And history here means the history of you and that individual that you're trying to communicate with. Much of the tone of your conversation will be set in your approach right from the start. Set your foundation. Think about your entrance into the discussion, select your words, and approach carefully. Otherwise, the communication might end before it's even begun. Be clear of your intention from the start. Saying something like, this might be a tough conversation to have, but let's be gentle with each other and really try to understand each other better on this issue. That can already set the stage and the foundation for, let's take a breather and both be clear that we're having this conversation because we want to work this out together. Next is problematic body language. Body language says more than our words much of the time. Making sure your expressions and body language are consistent with your intended emotion is also essential. Otherwise, you might just appear disingenuous, disrespectful. Be mindful of fidgeting or having a closed body stance, which would be this individual in the middle in that picture. Your facial expressions, or even your eye contact. Is it too much? Is it too little? All of those things weigh in on the message that you're sending without even saying a word. So this potential pitfall brings us back to that poll question we were answering in the beginning. Time and place. Significant kind of drawbacks right before you even start a conversation might be overlooking the importance of timing and where you are. Be mindful of selecting moments for communication that are not rushed and are not in the middle of an argument when you're already annoyed or upset or overwhelmed about whatever topic you're looking to address. Way easier said than done. I should have said in the beginning, these are things we know. These are things I'm hoping to share with all of you. But even in my position right now, trying to offer some education about these things, this is not what I do most of the time either. I think I might have clicked the sometimes option on that poll question myself. And then finally, select a place that seems safe and neutral for the both of you. The other one that we're getting to now is negative emotion. This is a really big one. Why should we aim to have important messages sent after one is calm? Negative emotion can certainly get in the way of effective communication. I bet you all knew that already. That's because none of this is rocket science, but that still doesn't make the execution and avoiding these pitfalls easy. As I said, we know it, but putting it in practice might be a different situation. Negative emotion can cloud your judgment, distort what you see and what you hear, literally distort it, right? You might think, and you would put money on the fact 100% this is what just came out of that person's mouth. You can then stress out that person and then ask them again if they heard something correctly, and they quite literally will get it wrong and will not hear it properly. So it really does distort things. And negative emotions, you might end up sending messages that you don't want to send. It also lowers your tolerance and your ability to navigate successfully to a good outcome because your mind is just not thinking as clearly. Please remember to also be kind to yourself with your communication as well, because you will make mistakes. We all do, but they can always be revisited later and patched up. If you did make that foundational mistake of getting into it before you were calm or before you found the right foundation and the right time. Okay, and then finally, history. This roadblock might be one of the most powerful of them. It's impossible to undo history and the past in relationships. So one way to compensate for this is putting it out there. For example, I'm afraid because of other times we have been here that you're expecting me to just press replay on conversations that we've usually had about this. But let's try to be aware of not falling into our usual patterns and trust that we both really want what's best. So your experiences in life, as well as your history with the person that you're communicating with, can set you at a disadvantage before you even begin. So you'll see here that we've got three sort of concentric circles. There's you and your history, the other person and their own personal history, and the current situation. And right in the middle is where all of it is kind of overlapping. And this one can be really, really difficult for everyone to kind of try to reset and not fall back into other patterns. But that's why sometimes it's helpful to put it out there in the beginning. And when you're talking, if you notice it starts to fall back into one of those old maladaptive ways, you can stop and say, wait, hang on. We said in the beginning we were going to try not to do this. So let's take a pause and start over again. All right. Okay. So let's try another poll right here. What reactions do you find most challenging in the other person when communicating? It looks like defensive is winning so far. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about defensive or withdrawn and shut down. They're kind of both two responses that were a little bit up there. Um, so the defensive individual is not feeling safe, right? They're also probably remembering all the other times that they've kind of been in this situation and they've had the need to put the wall up. A lot of times, really taking a moment and saying, I feel as though the tension in this conversation is starting to go up. I don't want that. I don't want that right now. And I want to be clear about the fact that what my goal is for this conversation is to get to A, B, and C. It is absolutely not because I'm, upset with you or I'm trying to attack you. So again, we often in psychology call that bringing it to process, where you're not necessarily talking about the content, right? Where let's say I am arguing with a teenager about why again they just have not taken the appropriate time to, to do their chores. And immediately they start getting defensive because they're automatically assuming they know where you're going in the conversation. So you could keep talking about the chore and your frustration. That's the content of the conversation. The other piece is the process, where you're almost taking a helicopter up above your conversation. You're taking an aerial view and you're saying, hang on, let's pause for a second and look at what's happening between the two of us. That is often a way to disarm a defensive individual and remind them that you're also noticing this is not going in the direction you want. So that's maybe one approach that could be helpful. Withdrawn and shut down, those individuals I feel like that have this style oftentimes are kind of, they boil over easily and everything feels very overwhelming. So I will say either the approach is sometimes a little passive aggressive, or it is because that person is needing to retreat into themselves to be able to handle the stress that they're experiencing that's coming along with the discussion. And often suggesting a break and coming back to it later can be really effective. Okay. All right, so here's that break. Wondering if anyone has any thoughts or questions so far. Again, if you think about how some of these things might apply to you in some of the scenarios you've found or challenges that you've, encountered in your own life, that certainly can be sent along, and we'll see if we can kind of tailor some of the answers.
Yeah, we have a question that's come in that I'd love to share. And I think this one probably holds a good amount of your thought around history getting in the way, because it has to deal with extended family. So the question is, so my extended family has a hard time coping with my child's diagnosis. I feel like they want me to comfort them instead of the other way around. I don't have the energy to do that. How can I communicate my needs and help them find, how can I communicate my needs to them and also help them find the support they need?
Yeah, that one is really rough because everybody is finding that they're in the position of need, right? Um, I think that often coming to a conversation, which we will get to in a little bit on the do's that are effective for communication, but I think coming into um, a difficult conversation, first laying out where you're coming from helps a great deal. So instead of saying necessarily, I can't do all of this for you, or this isn't fair, or I feel like your expectations don't make sense with the current situation that we're in, approaching it more with putting your own self out there first, saying, this is how I'm experiencing this. These are the areas that I'm struggling with. And I'm noticing that my bandwidth is shrinking dramatically, that I want to be there. These are the things that I want to do, but they may not right now equate to what I can do. And, you know, and give some faith and credit to people, because we are all so much more resilient than we realize, that these extended family members will figure it out. They will figure out how to get the support that they also need, just like you are able to do for yourself and your immediate family.
That's great. We do have one more question before we
Sure.
move on, if that's okay. So how do we go about setting history aside? Is it okay, or should we even be considering trying to ignore it, or is that unhealthy behavior in itself? And can that ever backfire and actually make things worse?
I don't think we can set it aside. I really wish we could. I wish I could give a different response to that. I don't think we can. It's now part of our story. It's part of our story in that relationship with whomever that is. The only way for it not to then become something toxic that affects you in a negative way is to be able to use it, is to be able to work through it, highlight it. Like I said, put it out there from the very start that I know historically these things have happened and we can't erase them. We can't erase the impact from those events or from those things that might have been said. But what we can do is learn from it and try to do things differently. And acknowledge that it's there and it might leave some scarring, right? But again, that is part of your story in that relationship. And it means that there's a lot of space for also growth from that place that maybe was less desirable.
Great. Thank you for responding to those.
Okay.
I think we're good to move on, and then we will keep checking questions as they come in. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Okay. So on to the high note that I was referring to, communication and what actually helps. So we'll go through each one of these. Focus, letting go of your own agenda, being self-aware and authentic, reflecting what you're understanding from what you've heard and what you're listening to, sharing your perspective, and empathy and vulnerability. And then finally, remembering that this is a delicate process, not a race. All right. So focus. Paying close attention will improve the accuracy of what you perceive, kind of like what we talked about earlier, where negative emotion can kind of make things cloudy in your mind, and you may not be interpreting things quite so accurately and could be distorted. Not paying attention can also dramatically distort what you're perceiving. So Paying close attention, you'll make sure that you're getting things accurate in terms of both verbal, what you're hearing, as well as nonverbal, what that person is communicating to you nonverbally. And it also truly allows the other person to feel that you're invested and helps them feel heard. Splitting your attention or multitasking, even for a moment, can shift things in a bad direction. Take, for example, that sort of stereotypical idea of what does someone do if they're wearing a wristwatch and they're bored, right? They check the time. Nowadays, if we're clicking on our phone for a second to look at the time, it seems like commonplace. We're just doing that because we need to know what time it is. You know, we've got a lot of things going on. But doing something as simple and really harmless, seemingly, something like that in the middle of a pretty intense conversation is just can feel like an absolute assault to the other person. So it's really important for you to put those electronics away. Make sure that if you're having a conversation, like, you know, if it's between a couple, that maybe if there are any children in the house, they're off and they have something to kind of do with their time. It's really important to be able to give full focus and attention when you're engaging in a critical conversation. All right, and remember that the purpose of your communication is to arrive to a better place or solution through a stable connection, not to recruit others into your way of thinking or feeling. This is such a tempting, you know, feeling when you are in an argument wanting to get that other person onto your side of the fence. Like, no, it's way better over here. You need to come over here and I'm going to tell you why. It's not about that. You may end the entire conversation without even being on the same side of the fence. It's really important to just arrive to understanding and empathy, trying to understand where the other person is coming from. Staying true to your desire to work through things and be sincere in the moment is really going to help you avoid falling into what we're all too familiar with as strategy or useless competition that can be, you know, embedded in some really uncomfortable communications. Okay, and we have here, be self-aware and honest. Be authentic. Trying to dismiss or hide your emotions is absolutely futile. We've talked about earlier with one of those questions with being able to set aside your history. It's just not possible. So trying to dismiss or hide your emotions when they're starting to run high is just not possible. And you're just going to give yourself away and cause the other person to feel uneasy and unsettled. So the good news is emotions can also be a powerful tool. Your emotions are okay and play a big role in your position. And when you're open with your emotions, you can actually use them to help somebody understand you. And you'll find them to be a helpful tool rather than a hindrance. Being self-aware and having a barometer of your stress level will also help you stay in tune with what you need, whether you want to speed up or slow down or take a break. If you don't have a finger on your own pulse, you will find yourself in no man's land, lost, and you're not even sure how the conversation got away from you. Attending to your emotions will also allow you to learn a lot about yourself in the midst of communication and may at times surprise you in a way that can be really helpful. So an example here, I'm talking to someone and I say, I noticed just now when you said that I hurt you, I actually started to feel defensive. And I don't want to have that response. Maybe we can work together so that I don't find myself being so reactive, right? That's me taking, you know, being sensitive to where I am in this conversation and using that by communicating my reaction to them as a way to actually help us further along to joining one another. Okay, reflect your understanding. As you listen, you want to nod and periodically summarize what you've heard in a way that seems to highlight the important message and meaning that you feel like is being delivered to you. Everyone wants to feel heard. What I hear you saying is, now, full disclosure, my husband in my marriage is just absolutely the worst at this. I have to constantly say, so what did you hear? What did you hear that I just shared with you? Because I know it's important to do, but that a lot of times it's kind of, yes, I got you. But if that other person is not paraphrasing or trying to reframe it and give it back to you, you also may not know if they've accurately understood what you've said or if you've even communicated any of it clearly. I think it's also important to do that, to make sure that the other person doesn't feel like you're checked out or disinterested. So don't look at it as oh, well, I don't want to interrupt them. Just try to have a nice balance where you're still kind of saying or nodding and saying, what I hear you saying is this. What I think you're trying to tell me is this. I promise you it'll go a really long way. And obviously, as I said, it helps you both stay on the same page. You can be in agreement on where one another is coming from without necessarily agreeing on the issue. This is really huge. I think, I'm just underscoring it by putting it here on this slide, but it's, again, similar to the fence analogy that we talked about earlier. Share your perspective. Stick to your own perspective using I statements rather than you. Assume everyone is unique and try your best, no matter how well you know someone. This is where the history comes in, not to assume that you know how they feel better than they do. And it will also drive the other person crazy. Try to notice and prepare before you make a statement that may not land softly. If you take your time and notice that what you're about to say is going to generate a difficult reaction, try and include a caveat such as, what I'm about to say might be difficult to hear, and I promise I'm not saying it with the intent to hurt you, just with the hope that we're going to be able to work better through this. Remember always to be careful with one another's feelings. Okay. And here's another one that also is very difficult to put into practice because you're like, I'm in the thick of it. I'm not going to abandon this now. But if you feel like you might start burning out, if you're losing your footing or direction, or you notice the other person is shutting down, starting to get defensive, is losing their footing, you might suggest a break and picking up the conversation again at another point. It's worth the investment to be successful. And that is also something you can put out there. I'm not trying to escape the conversation. I'm not trying to slip out through the back door. I'm just noticing that we're starting to get a little raw right now. This conversation is so important to me. Can we please take a break and digest some of the things that we've talked about so we can come back to it with fresh eyes and we can really set ourselves up for success? Okay. Now, as you are actively listening to both words and gestures, you want to try to find the emotion behind the scenes, both for yourself and the person you're communicating with. Speak to that emotion and don't be afraid to show your hand and be vulnerable. Easier said than done. Search for the positive regard for that person and where they might be coming from, their position, and try to give them the benefit of the doubt. So empathy and vulnerability, especially if it's a communication that might start to involve some anger or frustration, pulling on vulnerability and showing your cards is not necessarily the strategy that is going to come naturally, but it's really, really important. And even in communicating when there is not frustration or it's not about anger or we're disagreeing on something, pulling on your feelings and communicating that to that other person is going to absolutely assist you to getting to a deeper place of understanding and joining. So let's take a closer look at this really important subject. I want you to say to yourself right now, as I read through this, openness and vulnerability will put you at risk and showcase weakness. I want you to ask yourself, is that true or false for you? Really search your beliefs. And depending on your answer to this, I want you to really ask yourself, how does that feed into my success rate in my communications, in my relationships? So I don't think I'm making it a secret to suggest that vulnerability is essential to connection. Shame and pride keeps us far away from it. It is a wall that you will not get connection through, but it's vulnerability and sharing that shared human experience is what puts us together. In order to really join with another person and communicate, you have to allow yourself to really be seen. And your vulnerability and your courage in doing that will really allow others to shed their barriers too. You're modeling it for them. And by doing that, you become a person instead of a threat or a target. Okay. So that went even faster than I anticipated. So not sure if there are any other questions, but that's kind of the close of the presentation in terms of the slides.
Yeah, we definitely have a few other questions that
Okay.
came in, which I think are really interesting and really good. I'm glad that people are putting them out there, and I think that they're fairly relatable to a lot of us here probably today. So my daughter that had cancer, as well as my other children, so siblings, have been having a hard time being included in their friend groups, friend circles, being invited to play dates and things. Struggling on how to talk about that to my child and family, as well as it looks like whether or not they should be talking to the friends, family, friends, parents about it. So I think someone's looking for a little bit of advice on to handle that very delicate situation.
That is really rough. And I absolutely hate to hear that kids find that experience when they're already struggling with something so difficult that it ends up impacting their friends and their social circles. This one's a little bit harder to kind of give a sort of broad stroke response, only because I feel like it does depend a little bit on the age of the children. But my gut reaction would be making sure to talk to your child about how they would feel if you did help them in communicating that to their friends or their friends' parents. So saying, I can do it for you, or I can help you practice on what you want to do if you want to do it yourself, or we can both do it together. I think for young children, certainly going through the parents is a great approach, because if younger children have just they're not sure how to understand what's happening, and if they were given the language, they might navigate the friendship a little bit differently. So I always say, regardless of age, you always want to follow your child's lead, whether they're a teenager, whether they're 5 years old, but you do want to open the dialogue, and and don't be afraid to say, I don't know the perfect answer to this. There is no perfect answer to this, but I want to make sure that I'm also helping you with how you might want to handle it. And I'm willing to do whatever it is. Here are some of my ideas. And and just see how it goes.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And I know that it's a transition for so many of us. We see our children go through so many stages, and we just want them to have the most normal childhood they can after, during, and after. And those friends play such a critical role. And it would be nice to have ways to make everybody aware of that, having a good friend is something that's just so important. So thank you for that and helping us figure that out a little bit. So another question that came in, and this is one about talking to the treatment team, which I think is another important line of communication. And again, this is one that's recently off treatment. And they were told to go back to using the pediatrician for fevers and etc. And this participant, it says, I'm not really comfortable with this yet. How do I let my onc and pediatrician know how I'm feeling?
Okay. I'm going to be the worst and say that something popped up on the screen in the first half of this. So how are we feeling that we're trying to communicate to the pediatrician and the oncologist?
Mhm.
What did we have anything included that suggested what the feelings were that were coming up?
I think nervousness about not being comfortable with what's the new protocol of not having to probably call the oncologist every time something's wrong, like the child has a fever, having to go into the
Okay.
hospital, kind of that transition to off treatment. And I think probably just from my own experience, if I'm interpreting this, the safety net's kind of gone and I'm not really ready to let go yet. And even though I'm supposed to be ready, I'm not. And how do I communicate that to the people that are really helping me, get my child through this transition too?
Got it. Okay, that was helpful. Thank you. So yeah, I think you'd be surprised to know how many of the providers are also having a difficult time that you're saying a little bit of a more distanced goodbye. I think, you know, it's important, and especially if you have doctors that you trust and medical team that you trust and you're close with, that you kind of tell them where you're coming from and say, this is a big change for us. You have been kind of you've been the service that's allowed us to feel like we can breathe a little bit easier. And whether there might be a part of my mind or not that appreciates we are doing well and may not need to be as sort of attached at the hip to clinic anymore, it doesn't mean that we still don't feel like we need it and that it's scary not to have it. You know, I want you to know how I'm feeling about this because I do feel the inclination to reach out to some about things because I'm moving through this adjustment. And honestly, I think, if you have a medical team that you really do trust and has been working closely with you for some time, they'll be able to hear that and appreciate it.
Yeah. Great. And we had another question come in. This kind of builds off the friendship and friends, discussion we had a little bit more. It says, my daughter can't keep up with her friends. She's 11 years old because of treatments. So she ends up feeling left out when they are together, when they are running around and being hyper. Would it be okay to talk with her friends when they come over?
Again, I might suggest, when we said she's 11, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, I might suggest that you still talk to your daughter first about that, to sort of say, listen, I know sometimes this bothers you. And again, treat it just kind of how I did how I had suggested earlier, to sort of say, let's work together to figure out how to tackle this. Because I've known some sassy 11-year-old females in my time, and that could easily backfire too, right? Like, mom, why did you say something to them like that? So I really would sit down with them and create a plan. Like, how do you want me to do it? Because that also could be something else where it could be through the parents. They let the kids know to help educate them. They come over to the house and they have kind of a different understanding.
Yeah. Absolutely. During your presentation, you talked about self-awareness, right? And that's something that I try to practice in my everyday. And I think I found it helpful to take a moment, step back, think about, who my audience is and what I'm really trying to accomplish. I've certainly progressed in that probably since the days when my son was in active treatment, when everything just kind of felt overwhelming and I probably reacted more than I responded, and have hopefully I think progressed a lot in that with conflict resolution. But what would be your tips for somebody who desires to potentially want to be more self-aware, but is very much still in the thick of things and just putting pieces together and just making it work? What are some activities we can do to kind of feel more grounded?
Yeah, I think the thing that we're able to key into the easiest when overwhelmed is really our body, right? It's less cerebral, there's less problem solving involved, there's not less analyzing, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, and more, okay, what's happening with my body right now? Where are my shoulders? Where's my breathing? Where are my muscles? How am I standing? What stance am I, what position is my body in right now? And those can actually be like that scan of your body and how you're feeling physically can be a sort of a little bit of a cheat sheet as to where you are emotionally and where your comfort level is in that moment. As well as you need to really have a pretty well rehearsed exit strategy, right? Like, because sometimes you push and push and push your body and your system beyond the limit because you're really feeling as though this is an important communication. You have to hang in there. But it's never proved to be successful, ever. You have to be able to pause and step away. And 9 times out of 10, you're even doing it for the other person's benefit as well, because nobody's really good at that, right? Especially if they care about the topic a lot.
Yeah. And then we have one last question, and it touches upon what you spoke of earlier with negative emotions, right? So one of the ways we communicate is with ourselves, right? So, and I think, how we probably process negative emotions as part of that communicating with ourselves. So can you talk a little bit more about negative emotions and, how they can also, which I think might be good for this audience, be healthy if we have the tools to process through them?
So I feel like accepting that all emotions are healthy is sort of the number one point that you really need to kind of take home when you're thinking about managing feelings and your well-being and managing healthy relationships. I used to do this craft with kids, years ago, where we would make a heart pillow and they would put all their like little treasures and secrets on the inside of it. And out on the front, we would write the name when they could tell me a time that they've had that feeling, write the name of the feeling on the heart. And the healthier the heart could be, was the more feelings we could actually write on the heart. And so the message wasn't only having the positive ones. The message was having the negative ones as well. And the piece that is important about negative emotion is that it is a commonality between you and who you're trying to connect with. And being authentic and really trying to use that as a way to be seen and put yourself out there. And again, back to that piece about vulnerability is really saying, I am struggling right now, and that's human, and that it's normal, and we can talk about it, because that's not something to kind of be ashamed of. And it's the negative emotions that are really going to allow for more connection and joining than I would say even trying to connect on positive ones.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Well, we want to thank everyone for the excellent questions. I'm going to throw in a little surprise there. So if you did ask a question, looks like we have one more. Oh, no, we got to that one. Okay. So if you did ask a question today, and my producers here don't know this, if you would like to send an email to events@momcology.org, we'd love to gift you a mug from Momcology, the ones you see on our shoulders here, for taking the time, asking a question, and taking a step forward in your self-care today. So that would be great. Thank you, producers, for hearing me out on that. So I think we're good to wrap up the session today. Thank you, Dr. Naguib, for your time and your sharing your expertise with us in the community. I know we're working on getting these webinars produced and up in a public forum so anybody can watch them at their convenience. Oh, I think we have another question since we have time.
We do. We do.
Yes. So, okay, perfect. I find it hard to relate to people anymore. I can relate to that. My kid had cancer. People get really worked up about so much trivial stuff. How do I get past this feeling like I can't deal with their stuff? Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from parents as well. It's almost like existing on a different plane that you didn't know was there before, and all of a sudden nobody else is on it with you. That's a really tough one. I think I'm inclined to reinforce connecting with your sensitive tribe, if hopefully you have some individuals that realize that they should be putting things in a little bit of perspective when they're spending time with you, and are able to recognize and appreciate what you've been through and what you're going through, and have a personality that, you know, sort of lends to that type of a friendship and relationship a little bit better. And then of course, you know, finding forums like this to be able to connect with like-minded individuals. The other thing I want to say also is time. I don't know how far out, you know, you are from, you know, from the experience, or if sorry, I don't have the question, if you, if your child is currently in treatment or not, but over time, I think the normalcy with everything starts to set in a little bit easier. And it comes in stages, and although I think that there's always the inclination to want to fix something, right, if it feels uncomfortable, whether it's with your child or with a family, with your extended family members that might be in pain, or even with yourself, some of it is just kind of accepting that space, and, you know, and trying to be kind to yourself and patient that it will improve with time.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember kind of just making a commitment to myself at one point, like it's not my job to teach people how I feel. And I made it my job to find people who can relate to how I feel. And I think that's a huge part of, you know, why momcology has kind of served this void that was existing. I know that I felt very alone and isolated, and I had to teach people what I was going through, but really I just needed somebody who understood what I was going through.
Yeah.
And it made all the difference for me. And hopefully we're continuing to amplify that through this wonderful community. A couple more questions that have come in. Thank you very much for this. I'm the father of a child that passed away from cancer. And to be honest, I feel like I have the right to just shut people down when I do not like what they have to say when trying to compare their loss to mine. Not that their loss is any less than mine, but you can't compare the loss of a child to a grandparent or an uncle. Am I wrong for doing this? Absolutely not. Yeah.
I don't even know if I have anything else to add. I'm like, yes, absolutely, shut that down.
Yeah.
100%. It just kind of reminds me of some of the families that I've also worked with, where they feel like they have to do so much caretaking of their community and the other people around them, because everyone is reaching out to help. Everyone's reaching out to support at any stage in the journey. And it can sometimes feel more like a burden than a help. And there's a lot of, I think, sometimes guilt that comes up. Like, is it okay that you know, that I'm not bringing them into the fold every 5 minutes? Is it okay that I'm not giving the, you know, the update every 5 minutes? And is it okay that, like, I don't want to message you back, or I don't want to call you back right now? And yes, the answer to all of that is yes, it absolutely is okay. And if these are people, again, that are worth being in your tribe, you know, they're going to understand it. And you're also educating them by telling them that, you know, sorry, that's not the same. And the next time that they find themselves in a similar position, maybe they'll learn that offering that kind of support is not always helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Such a hard thing to have to work through. And I know that we all get a lot of, and I certainly didn't lose a child, so I don't know what that feels like, but people giving advice that just wasn't helpful. And having the tools to approach that, I think is so important. And again, I would lean to my people, just like we're doing right now, which is really helpful. A few more questions have come in. Because my child had cancer, everyone thinks I'm an expert and wants me to talk to their friend whose child is newly diagnosed. Is it okay to feel like I want to put it behind me and not reopen the wounds? That's okay too. Yes.
You know how many kids have also told me that they feel obligated to support other kids when there might be another person at their school that gets diagnosed,
Right.
feeling almost like they're responsible for being the poster child because they've gone through such a difficult time and such a trauma. It's unfair to yourself to feel that way. So yeah.
Whatever we need to do to get through it and feel that that's what matters. This is the time, I think, for a question like that. And you don't ever have to worry about it for putting yourself and your emotions first. I can't think of a more important time than trying to heal self and family to do that. Yeah. A couple more questions. So we have a 5-year-old boy that is in remission. We now have a 2-month little girl. He wakes up in the middle of the night and is so excited that it takes 3 hours to go back to sleep. Also, the school told us he pays less attention in school. What can we do to solve this big issue?
I feel like that was a longer one and I need to read it.
Do you see it in there?
Yeah.
Okay. He's so excited to see his little sister.
Oh my goodness.
I love it.
So just there is not an iota of sleeping happening in that house.
Yeah, I think how to communicate with the school, that this is just a really happy thing for him, for a kid that's had a hard time. And
yeah. I think that, needing to make sure that the school is doing what is on them to help support his attention. I feel like I hear all too often the school, and not necessarily because they're trying to be difficult, but they will sort of put this back on families to sort of suggest, I think your child is acting this way, or and to be honest, it's a big adjustment, for him. And the fact that schools are supposed to be taking accountability for not only their education, but, helping them grow as little humans. And if he's struggling a little bit with their attention, they are absolutely equipped to try to address that. And that should not be something that, is on your plate. And there's certainly also advocate services to help if for God forbid, if you do have a district that is a little bit more difficult. But I think I wish, this is where it's tricky, because I have follow-up questions that I wish I could ask to kind of get a little bit more clarity. But in terms of him being so excited and waking up in the middle of the night, I'm sure that there are strategies that, you can also kind of try with him that'll help him understand and settle back down, even though he might be really excited about his new sibling. So this would be one where I would almost encourage you to connect to your healthcare center and ask them like how they think you would be able to support him and what language, and they'll be able to get more information from you than I will right now, but hopefully be able to offer you some guidance on that.
Great.
Oh, but it sounds rough. I do hope you get some more sleep.
Oh, what a sweetie pie. Wants to play.
Yeah.
I love it. An exciting time in the house. So our next question is kind of about partner and spouse communication, which I love to see. My daughter's 3, is currently going through treatment, and I feel like everything falls on me. And my husband has it a little bit easier. I'm the one who's always with her, deals with her meltdowns, and stays with her at the hospital. I'm starting to feel some resentment towards him. Our communication has really gotten difficult, and I'm not sure how to get through this. Any advice would be appreciated.
This can also really be difficult because oftentimes, even if your spouse was more sort of, I'll take over right now, go take a break, the child may not allow for that, right? So, your daughter might be in the situation where she's like, I want mommy. So regardless of whether, he's around and willing. So that can be a difficult piece too, and needing to be mindful of, although it sounds impossible for a mother to do it with their child, to place some kind of boundaries also for her benefit, to not only be looking to you, because she also needs to like some help, kind of an opportunity to self-regulate a little bit. But in terms of your spouse, I think again, leading with your vulnerability and your emotions is really what's going to help you get across. Making sure not to say, you don't do anything, I take care of everything, right? Those those automatic thoughts and statements that one would make in that situation. You want to try to be a little bit more cautious with the way that you frame things, in saying, this is how I'm feeling. I am feeling burnt out. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling scared about our daughter's health. I'm feeling scared about our relationship. I don't want us all to drown in the middle of this, and I am willing to do anything to help us get to a better place. Starting and framing your conversation that way may, again, with your vulnerability, that might help sort of bring some of the barriers down a little bit and help him to hear you a little more.
Yeah, no, I can really relate to that one too. I always say my husband does a million things amazing, but what she was talking about was one of the things that we had to work on. And I know for me, I gave him, like, I'm really struggling right now. I'm really feeling stressed out. Can I ask you to take one thing off my plate? And that's where we started. And it helped. Not perfect, certainly not perfect, but
Yeah.
just having that talk with vulnerability that I was struggling, I think helped. He had to hear it from me, and he had to hear it from me in a state of vulnerability. So that's really good advice. So our next question is about communication.
Can I actually just say, I think
Yes.
I think I saw a clarification pop up
Oh,
for one of the other questions with
okay.
the little one waking up in the middle of the night. If that's the same person, saying that actually it's because he's jealous.
Oh, we
Which
didn't want to play
would be my
jealous.
automatic assumption,
That makes
honestly,
a difference.
because it would be a pretty, just like outlier as a 5-year-old with a new baby in the house to
Yeah.
not be feeling jealous. But I actually am working with a family right now that's kind of battling that same piece, and because it's contesting for that attention. And the one thing that I always do in my sessions is to sit down with him and talk about how there are two different ways to get attention, but one is like kind of yucky attention, and one is the baby love attention. And even though we may not be a baby anymore, we still love the baby love attention. And how can we communicate that to mom and dad to be able to get more of that instead? Maybe more cuddling, maybe ask mom if she wants to hug, and try to incentivize a little bit so that he doesn't wake up in the middle of the night. I would suggest kind of making a chart where every morning he could get a sticker and like a happy dance to a fun song first thing, when he gets up from bed, if he was able to remain in his bed overnight and not necessarily kind of wake up. Sorry, just wanted to give the
Yes, because that definitely made a
adjusted
difference
response.
with the direction we were heading with that response. Absolutely. So our next question is about communication between a parent and an AYA, which I think is really interesting too. And funny enough, just as you were answering that question, my now AYA survivor was just ringing me on my phone. So perfect timing. And that doesn't happen often from college. So it's nice to see that happen. So anyway, perfect timing. So this one is, I have a 19-year-old son who is in treatment for ALL for the third time. Oof. And just had a stem cell transplant. He barely talks to us, and he is understandably angry and depressed. He also wants to be independent, but needs the help. Tough situation. How do we communicate with him that we just want to help him, have a relationship with him, and at the same time, want him to learn some independence and responsibility?
Okay, this one is a big one. Because if your teen or young adult is struggling with depression or anxiety, right? And again, we don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I am hearing things like shutting down, withdrawing. That throws a different variable into the communication piece, because that's also one of those things that we cannot necessarily set aside and not take into account. And often what I relate to families is that depression is kind of like wearing a pair of dark colored glasses as opposed to the rose colored ones. Everything, even the glass in those glasses can be a little bit wonky. Everything's distorted a little bit. It's darker than it is in reality. And so none of the perceptions are really the way that it would be if the glasses were off. So if you're dealing with, a teenager or a young adult who's kind of, experiencing that right now, you can't just tell them to take the glasses off. You can't just take the glasses off them. They need to be able to get some professional assistance and support. And then as those lenses start to clear up, then they're able to kind of be on a little bit more of a reasonable playing field with you to have that communication and really be able to receive you in the way that you're meaning to deliver it. So even if you are the queen of communication, trying to deliver a message to somebody who has that set of glasses on, it may not be successful. And I know that probably sounds like a pretty discouraging response to hear, but it sounds like if he's just gone through transplant, I mean, he's been through it. You should still be closely connected, my hope is, to the treatment team, and they should be able to find ways to support him and kind of get him to the point where he might be comfortable talking to somebody, even if he might not want to. Now, I don't have you on here to be able to kind of ask some more questions, but the average 19-year-old, this certainly is not an average story, but a 19-year-old having gone through what they've gone through and facing what they're currently facing, and the limits and restrictions with with even being able to actually see and spend time with other people right now outside of transplant, I wouldn't be surprised if he would say absolutely no. I'm not talking to a counselor. I'm not doing that. I'm not talking to a psychologist. But connect with the medical team. They, their psychosocial counterparts of that team have some tricks up their sleeve, and I promise he's not the only teenager that they've come across that they had to support in this way. So that would be my feedback.
Yeah, really hard one, really difficult. So our next question kind of swings in the age range in the other direction. This one says, my baby, 2.5 months old, was recently diagnosed and has begun treatment. Telling people about this feels very attention seeking to my husband and I. She's curious if other people have felt this way. We have also felt that sometimes people want to share for us to insert their involvement in the journey. Is it rude that this seems weird to me and that we feel frustrated by that? How do we move past that feeling while being respectful that others do want to help?
I feel like there was a lot in there.
Yeah.
Um, the attention seeking piece, did you interpret that to mean that the parents feel like they're being attention seeking if they share their stories with others, or that, because there was also a piece about other people inserting into their journey, which also seems a little bit like attention seeking on the part of people outside the family.
I'm reading it that they just kind of prefer to still be quiet about things.
Hmm.
And that's just how they're getting through it right now. And they're probably letting some people know, and they feel like maybe they're taking it and sharing it without their permission. So, and again, everybody's different. Everybody copes differently. I don't think there's any right or wrong to it. It's what helps you. But I think the part here, Dr. Naguib, that you can best help with is how can she communicate to those families that are maybe inserting themselves without permission. Mhm.
Um, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it really is coming back into it, finding the right setting, the right time, um, sitting down with those individuals and saying where you're coming from and how you are feeling. That this is a difficult situation and you are probably even still struggling to wrap your head around what's happening, that you can't even begin to consider how you want to integrate the rest of the outside world into your lives right now. And until you're in that place, what feels most comfortable is to you is to please give you the time to be able to share, the journey about your family, because you're not there yet and you don't know when you'll be or how you will be, but that's what you need. And I think when you position it in such a way that it's not sort of shaking your finger in someone's face saying like, what are you thinking, this is so disrespectful, this is our privacy, this is our story, um then you do run the risk of, I guess, you know causing them to be on the defensive or taking it the wrong way. If that's not, if you're concerned about how they're going to walk away from that conversation, again, going in a way where you're almost asking for their support in what is going to be most helpful for you, is just communicating to your supports how best they can be there, and sort of shift things from, this is the support you've been giving me, but that's not the way I need it. This is actually how I need it. So you're still allowing the people to support you, but in a way that's more in line with your wishes.
Yeah. We have another question that I think a lot of people can relate to. It says, how can I handle the at least comments? And I think we get these all the time,
Ooh.
right? And others minimizing things. Addition to having a child with cancer, we have a lot of stressors. So, right, we get that a lot on the receiving end of that community. At least they're doing well right now, or at least you're at home. And those don't feel like at least things to us when we're carrying so much. So what's a good way
Or
to
maybe this is happening because that
right?
one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
My gut feeling tells me that you're probably already responding to this in the best way that you possibly can, saying something along the lines of, yeah, but it doesn't feel that way, right? um I think it's less about maybe how you respond to it, because you probably have already brilliantly been navigating, your response when you have to sort of field comments like that, but more importantly, how do you address it again with that person so that it doesn't keep happening, right? It can even be like, before going through this, I might have thought that that was something that I would say to someone, to help them out, to help them feel strength and help them be able to appreciate what's going on so that they can get through it. But now going through this, I'm realizing that, it doesn't quite land that way. And I feel like this is how I need you to be here with me right now. And again, give them better language, give them a better approach if you can. At least it allows them to still try to connect and try to support you, but in a way that you need it, not in a way that's making it harder on you.
Yeah. Yeah, she provided a little bit more context of just because out of treatment, still so many appointments and worries, thinking about relapse, and just the stress of all the appointments and things. So it doesn't feel like, at least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we have a few more questions. Are we good on time? I think so. We've got a few more
10
minutes.
more. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's an interesting one about communication with an employer. So what is the best way to answer coworkers and bosses' questions about my daughter and her health without revealing too much, but addressing the real stress of it? She'll be starting radiation in a couple of months, and she has 3 rounds of chemo. And again, this is a delicate relationship, I would assume, with an employer. Time away from work, making sure you're being taken care of in the workforce that you really want. You want to be careful, I think, probably how you have these conversations when there's a catastrophic illness going on.
I think this is also when you have to really take stock again of your history with that person, pay attention to that person's personality, their own history, or what you've observed from their history and your time around them, to be able to kind of really select an approach and how you want to frame things and share things with that individual. Like, I can think of 2 different employers that I've had in my time, and I would approach it very differently with both, depending, because they were both just two very different people. Of course, suggesting that, your child is struggling with a very serious medical condition and you're still going through kind of the diagnostic and treatment phase, just playing it one day at a time, trying to find things out in order to figure out how this is going to unfold over time. That ambiguity is really, really difficult for you because it's throwing your life in upheaval. And you want to make sure that you're also being sensitive to the fact that your employer might feel like things are a little bit disjointed too. And again, kind of putting yourself out there and putting out the fact that you can already imagine what those concerns might be from the employer's end, which, goodness, again, I hate the idea that you even have to do this. But sometimes that can help if it's somebody that you will feel like might not get it right off the cuff, versus a really supportive supervisor or employer where you might be able to really just share a little bit more with them and hope that they would be flexible and understanding.
Yeah. We have a question. If you just maybe you have something in your pocket for a real quick response when somebody says, kind of off the cuff, well, everything happens for a reason.
Right. That was the other one that I hear a lot. Again, it depends, right? It's almost like when you're raising a kid, you want to sometimes pick your battles. being in a community of people and loved ones and strangers and whatever, sometimes you're also going to need to decide which are the ones that are kind of worth investing the effort of having kind of a drawn out discussion with, and which ones not so much. And so I would say if it's someone that is close in your life and they keep doing it and it's really bothering you, then sitting down and saying that may be something, maybe or maybe not, will be something that I could possibly reflect on in the years down the road. But I'm not there right now. And what I do need is for you to be able to share in the way I feel in this moment.
Yeah. That's great. Well, we have one last question for the evening. This has been a very fruitful, question and answer time. So this has been great. Thank you for everyone that contributed. And remember, if you did submit a question, please send an email to us at events@momcology.org with your mailing address, and we are going to send you one of these for helping us out tonight and contributing and sharing with us. So the last question is, my son is in remission, and I get very frustrated when family or friends think everything is back to normal. Behind closed doors, there is so much to do every day that affects treatments, between ongoing doctor's appointments, just everything. And I don't have a lot of support in that field because my son's internal family has little contact with him. How do I explain that it is still hard at times? I feel like there will never be a stop to all the appointments and stress. Ooh. It's hard to get other people to understand. It really is. Ooh. And to put that expectation on other people to understand is also hard to digest, right? Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that question about feeling like you can't connect with people anymore because everything else seems frivolous, or you're right, like they just don't get it. And I hear it from the kids too, that like, I thought everything was going to be back to normal after treatment, and this is the part that actually feels the most not normal, is coming back to life and still feeling, to regular life, and still feeling like I can't slip right back into where I was in my body, in my mind. And so, yeah, that certainly is an experience that caregivers have as well. And again, it depends on who it is. It depends if you feel like you need to invest that effort, if you need to have that conversation with that person. I mean, it's different than like, the lady that, is at the cashier at the grocery store that happens to know, what your family's gone through, and it has said something like, or is just kind of saying like, oh, glad everything's fine now, versus somebody who is really close in your life, and you want to be able to communicate to them that like, this has changed me, it has changed my family. And even aside from all of the ongoing logistical strains that you're facing with the appointments and there's always that, that stress and also that trauma from what, life is no longer. What is that like when teenagers have it and they just feel like, oh, invincibility, that it's gone, right? That bubble is just destroyed. Right. And there's a level of,
absolutely,
where you just don't have that sense of safety anymore. And that is a chronic burden, that you can't, it is going to be difficult to communicate that to somebody, but you can try to, right? Like explain that. That means that, it's a new version of your life moving forward. And it's not one where you're just back to the way it was before it happened.
Right. Yeah. I remember having a little bit of a epiphany with my internal communication and dialogue. And I always thought anything bad, something bad really bad ever happens, right? That you're going to have these certain people in your life are going to be there for you. And then when something like this, which is really bad, happens, and you come to the realization that some of those people aren't equipped to be there for you, it hurts. It's
Yeah.
painful. And it takes a while to also heal from that as you're dealing with all these different emotions, or to many of the questions that were asked today. How do I try to support my support system? That's overwhelming. So I just want to say thank you to, everybody. I feel every one of those questions that we had today. And I want you to know, if you're still here with us, we got you, right? This is why we're here. This is why the Momcology community exists. We need to talk to each other and help each other through that, as well as utilize the professional tools that are available to us through our care teams, through our hospital systems, and help us get over those really rough patches. But for the day-to-day things of I feel so alone, we're here for each other. And I think that this is so important. And I'm glad that we have this program to even just connect with each other in this new way. So again, thank you, Dr. Naguib. People that participated in the question and answer, email us, events@momcology.org. And our next session's coming up in March. We hope you'll join us. You will see a short survey sent to your email in the next couple of days. We're 2 sessions in, and we want to continue to get your feedback about this series. And as we continue to build it out and shape it, we're always a work in progress, each other and Momcology. So we do want to hear from you as we continue to build future programming. So with that, thank you. Wishing everyone, Dr. Naguib and everyone that participated today and your families a peaceful night. Thanks for being here. Bye.